Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. I'm Dan Denison, and we're delighted to have you join us for our webcast today, the title of which is Never Waste a Good Crisis. This is a part of a webcast series that we do monthly, and we hope you'll join us for this in the future. What I wanted to talk about today is some of the lessons that I've learned from talking with executives around the world over this past 6 months since the financial crisis began. And in each of those discussions, the same topic comes up. The topic is, why is culture an important thing to talk about now during the middle of a crisis? Is it still relevant? Do we have time to focus on this? Do we have time to pay attention to this issue when there are so many other things on our plate? And I have to say I've been surprised by the answer. The tone and focus of executive groups around the world has been on one point. It's that this is the time to do everything we can to get things right for the future. All of the theories of change that we work with emphasize the importance of urgency. And today that problem is solved. So my experience, rather than having executives reacting in crisis, in panic, wringing their hands, not knowing what to do, this has refocused their efforts and made the challenges clearer and made them focus in on those aspects of their organizations that they know need to change, and a shared recognition and consensus that now's the time to do it and now's the time to get it right. The crisis for them has made it clear where things stand. Or as Warren Buffett said, when the tide goes out, that's the time when you can really tell who's wearing their swimsuit and who isn't. So this is a time when the priorities are clear, the urgency is high, and what I've seen in many different companies, and somewhat of a surprise, is a focus in on what we need to do as leaders to position our organizations for the future. This is a time to get regrounded, realistic, and realigned. The first point I'd like to emphasize is that we're not going back. It's always a mistake to drive looking in the rearview mirror like we see on our slide here, but now more than ever. The focus has to be on the future. How can you take advantage of the crisis to gain on the competition? There's always a struggle between the past and the future in every organization. In a recent case study that we did with Domino's, we captured one of Dave Brandon's great quotes, that change is not a criticism of the past. It's more important than ever to see that our role as leaders is to position the organization for the future. Now, in many organizations, in many industries, we're left with little choice but to pursue what you might call a last man or woman standing type of a strategy, where we're all losing. It's just that we're losing a little bit more slowly than the competition, but we're using that to increase our competitive advantage over the people in our industry, over our competition during a tough time in the business cycle. So I think the first question that needs to get addressed is, how will you be positioned for the recovery? If you don't make those choices now and don't use that as the guiding light for making the changes that you need to make it through the crisis, when we come out the other end, we won't be positioned the way that we want to. We've heard a lot in this last election cycle about the audacity of hope, but I'd like to spend a few minutes on what I would call the audacity of nope. And that is that this is a bad time for playing politics. We need to move forward with a pragmatic integrity that allows us to move fast and remain focused. The time for squaring off, posturing, playing politics on either side of the fence I think is past, and hanging on to the past is even more dangerous than usual. This has to be a time in your organization, in every organization, that'll survive and will reposition for the future, to rise above this and to see the importance of keeping an eye on the future, and to see that in this situation that's even more important than usual. This diagram is one that we often use to explain how culture develops over time, and how the culture of an organization really captures the lessons that organizations learn as they survive. Now, on the left-hand side of your screen, I've got an iceberg that we often use to contrast the internal dynamics of the organization, the underlying principles that aren't often seen clearly, with the visible parts that we see above the water. The 10% of the iceberg we can see above the water, those are the visible symbols that we can see. So both the symbols and the underlying principles need to fit together, but the culture grows as it defines those lessons that we've learned from survival that we think are important, and we think are the ones that we need to pass on to the rest of the organization. Leaders have a big influence on the lessons that are learned during the crisis. If you don't learn during the crisis, you won't be well positioned for the future. You know, I've had some unusual conversations since the crisis began, and I have to say that 3 or 4 times I've fallen into the same discussion with people that are about the same age as I am, about their fathers or their parents during the Great Depression of the 1930s. And the story centers around how you pretty quickly learned that since you couldn't afford a new pair of shoes, that you could afford to get some cardboard and cut it out and stick it in as inserts in your old shoes, which of course had holes in them, especially in the winter. And a little bit of cardboard in your shoes help keep your feet warm. And this lesson stayed with our fathers for their whole lives. The hardest times create the most long-lasting lessons, and I think that while it's hard, just reacting to day is hard enough, is enough of a challenge. But I think that the real challenge for leaders is to help make it clear what the lessons are that we need to learn during these hard times, because those will be the ones that'll have the biggest impact and will be most long-lasting for the future. If you don't learn, you won't be well positioned for the recovery. Another critical factor is to rediscover your core value proposition. And I think that's always closely linked to the core values of an organization. Some companies may have lost sight of their core value proposition, why it is that they produce value of an organization, why it is that their organization provides value to you, the customer, in a way that's superior to anyone else in the world. Why does the world need your organization? What's the purpose? These are some of the most important things for you to preserve and to strengthen during this recession, because these are what we have to build and clarify in order to position you for the recovery. I'd like to share a couple of stories with you, and I'd like to contrast 2 organizations in the way that they've looked at their core value proposition. The 2 organizations are Citibank and Hyundai. I had the recent experience as a customer with Citibank of Citibank raising the limit on a credit card that we had in the family from $5,000 to almost $40,000. over time without any requests on our part. Now, after that process of raising the limit, then we received a letter saying that our APR, our interest rate, was also being increased. And we read through the letter all the way down to the bottom that said, if you'd like to cancel your account, here's the number to call, because my reaction to that was that Citibank was trying to kind of solicit extra business, whether we needed it or not, wanted it or not, deserved it or not, and also trying to raise the rates on that. So we decided quickly we wanted to cancel. Now, of course, the number that they gave you to call, that person wasn't authorized to actually cancel the card. That person was a salesperson, basically. And eventually they transferred the call a second time to someone that, with some vigorous urging on my part, finally was able to say that they would cancel the card. But basically the second person was a salesperson as well. I know that Mr. Vikram Pandit has a hard job these days. I don't mean to be critical, and we did invite him to this webcast. I wasn't able to attend, but I don't think Citibank gets it. I think that they saw the value proposition for them, not the value proposition for me, for us as a customer. And I think that's a lesson to us all, that during this financial crisis, we have to be clearer than ever as to our purpose and how it is that we as individuals and we as organizations create value for others. Now, the second story about Hyundai is quite a different message here. Hyundai, as some of you may be aware, has advertised that they will sell you a new car, lease you a new car, and in the event that in the future you lose your job, that you'll be able to return the car to them with no damage to your credit rating. Families that need transportation, people that are moving, taking new jobs, are concerned about the risk of making this financial commitment over a period of time that involves a lot of uncertainty. Hyundai's addressed that. And they've addressed it well. They've addressed it in an innovative way. It's interesting to wait and see how long it takes the rest of the credit companies to follow that lead, but they will, because it's a good idea that has real value for the consumer, the customer, the person who really creates the value by buying their products. So I encourage you to contrast these and to also look more clearly at your own organizations. What's the core value proposition? How's that linked to the core values of the organization? And how can you clarify this during the time of struggle? Times of plenty allow us to try lots of different things, lots of innovations, lots of new things, lots of trials. Periods of retrenchment require us to focus in on what we do best and how we really create value. I've been very interested to note that one of the banks that has survived quite well, they've got some publicity that wasn't so good over the last few weeks about an employee recognition meeting that they were planning to hold in Las Vegas. But Wells Fargo Bank is one that has emphasized culture. It's also one that's fared quite well through, comparatively speaking, through this crisis, and likely to be one of those who will come out the other end stronger. A few months ago, before the crisis began, last summer, John Stump, the CEO of Wells Fargo, had a great quote that I've shared with everyone every chance I get now. He says, "It's about culture. I could leave our strategy on an airplane seat and have a competitor read it, and it would not make any difference." This emphasizes that it's the implementation of the strategy. It's our ability to align and deliver that's the crucial capability for organizations. And in fact, this is clearly a time when you can strengthen that ability. I also want to emphasize the point that this is a time to connect. This is a year that will draw on all your courage and strength because many of your people will struggle and will need your help and respect. It's a big challenge, and we need to focus our attention on that. The other thing I would like to emphasize about this is that the symbolic impact of your behavior as a leader is more important than ever. The symbols, the actions speak far louder than the words, and they travel far longer distances, and they last a long time. Let me give you an example. Last summer, again before the crisis, the new chairman of Toyota Motor Company, Akio Toyoda, visited the R&D center here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Toyota R&D Center. And while he was here, he was concerned about a particular warranty claim that they were having on a number of vehicles. And so he went out to one of the dealerships to see the dealer's experience with this. And while he was doing this in his blue business suit, red tie, white shirt, he kneeled down to look up under the car to see about the issue about the warranty claim. So Akio Toyoda is the grandson of the founder of Toyota. In Japan, many would regard him as a god. He spent a lot of time in North America as well. And he clearly puts the customer first. It sends a signal around the world that no leader, no matter how big, how tall, it should be above kneeling down to understand the problems and needs of their customers. So the symbolic impact of the behavior echoes far and wide. I'm not sure about the practical value of Mr. Toyoda kneeling down to look underneath the under tray of one of his company's products in a dealer parking lot in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but I am clear about the symbolic impact that had throughout the organization. Again, this is a time to connect. It'll draw on all our reserves, our courage, and our strength, but it's a very important thing to do because our people need that. Our people demand that. Our experience in our business over the last 6 months has been surprisingly good. Business has stayed strong, even though many of the companies that we work with have fewer resources, less to spend, need a more direct focus on the impact that they need, the results that they expect. But the business has still stayed quite strong. I think the lesson that we take from that is that this is still a time when companies need to focus on their organization, on their people, on their leadership, and on their ability to deliver. We still think that the 4 basic points that make up the foundation of our model are more relevant today than ever. To start, in the upper right-hand corner, the first point we always emphasize is mission. Do you know where you're going? Is there a meaningful direction for the organization, long-term and short-term? We need both. This part of the model focuses our attention on the strategy, the vision, the goals of each organization, and how they contribute to success. In the upper left-hand corner of the model, adaptability is the second key trait that we focus in on. Are you listening to the marketplace and translating the demands of the business environment into action by creating change, focusing on the customer, and learning as an organization? This external focus that comes through a combination of mission and adaptability is a good predictor of sales growth in good times. We also think that it's proving to be a good predictor of who retains as much of their sales as possible when times are tough. Bottom half of the model emphasizes two other concepts: involvement and consistency. Involvement focuses on the flexibility of engagement, team orientation, and capability development, and really gives us a sense of whether or not our people are aligned and engaged. When people are aligned and engaged, they can deliver against the mission in good times and bad, and they can provide the responsiveness and flexibility to the marketplace. Without those strengths of the people and the workforce, the capability of the organization's compromised. The fourth concept is consistency. Are we building a system that creates leverage? Are we defining the values and systems that are the basis of a strong culture through our core values, agreement, and through coordination and integration? Like involvement, consistency focuses our attention internally in the organization and has shown close links to operating performance in many different studies. This year, there'll be a lot of loss. There'll be a lot of downsizing, and it's a tough time, no question about it. But creating stronger alignment in support of a more clearly defined mission that better uses and develops our system to deliver for the customer in the marketplace is still a formula that will win. It's hard to do research on something that's unfolding before our very eyes every day, but what we're seeing is companies continuing to use our tools and our solutions to help focus their attention on how to survive through tough times. So that's the message that I wanted to share with you today, and is some of the lessons that I've gotten from meeting with executive groups in different settings all around the world since the start of the financial crisis. And some of those lessons have been a surprise to me, and I wanted to share those with you. We also, as we've been doing the webcast, we've had a number of questions coming in from all over, and we're delighted to have you with us. We will respond to these questions, but I do want to take a few of the questions now and address them. And others, if we don't address your question online today, we'll get back to you in person. First question comes from Kaja Kalina in the Netherlands. And she said, do you see or experience differences with charity organizations, not-for-profit, non-governmental organizations? What advice can you give? Good question. Thank you. We do a lot of work with not-for-profit organizations, large and small, local to global, in focus. And I think the biggest difference is that so many not-for-profit organizations have the biggest challenges with the fewest resources of any organizations that I've worked with. They rely on creativity and commitment of their people, many of whom are volunteers. They manage exceptionally complex networks of stakeholders that require, constant cultivation and management. I don't see big differences between the not-for-profit organizations and for-profit organizations in terms of what works, what makes an effective leader, how do you mobilize your people to meet the challenges that confront you. I just see the main difference being in the size of the challenge and the resources that are available to address the challenge. I think that we have a lot to learn from not-for-profit organizations because they do respond to such substantial challenges with such limited resources. But I think that the lessons are clear focus, alignment with your people and with your stakeholders. Again, refining the core of your purpose. During stable times, during times of plenty, the capacity of not-for-profit organizations for scope creep, as the consultants say, where the range of things that you try to address keeps growing. I think this is the main area, not unlike for-profit organizations, that you need to address during difficult times. What are the priorities? What's the one most important thing? What's the fundamental purpose without which the core, the heart, the soul of the organization will be lost? Yes, we want to preserve the scope, the range, and impact that we've built up through the times of plenty, but not at the expense of the core mission. So it's time to know the difference. It's time to select, it's time to pick and choose and focus. Second question comes from Serena Bredea at Linkage in Boston, I think. And she asks, do you consider that there are some other business performance measures that have to be connected with culture in this crisis and recovery period, like risk-taking, like innovation? And I think that I guess the answer I'd give to that is that organizations in times of crisis and change need to pick a set of metrics that are specific to the situation. We had an interesting experience with a financial service organization this past year in October, where they really had a struggle because they all had their goals that they'd set at the beginning of the year in January, polished them up in February, spent the year working with them, and then kaboom, in September the world changes. They had to reformulate their goals. Realistically, what they had to do was scrap their goals, redefine their goals in terms of what they could do in reaction to the crisis and how they could track that more effectively. But that took a long time. That was a hard process. I think we need to go back to the second slide here. That's the picture of the driving in the rearview mirror. It took them a long time to realign around the goals appropriate to the situation, because there was so much internal commitment to the goals that they'd set in January of 2008. Certainly, risk-taking and innovation are very important during the crisis, but I think in a different way. Taking the risks when we're trying to avoid losses can be dangerous because we'll keep doing more and more risky things to avoid losses. And I think that the first thing that has to be done is build a stable base around the core value proposition, so that we have some sense of where's the bottom in this trough. When are we on solid footing? And that our innovation has to be in how quickly we can do that, how accurately, how carefully we can do that, and how quickly we can reformulate our plans for the future around a base level that we can depend on. I think that risk-taking and innovation will play a big part in the restructuring. There's a long tradition started by Joseph Schumpeter at Harvard University decades ago around the concept of creative destruction. These stories are starting to come out. The lessons of RCA for example, that invested a huge amount in R&D during the Great Depression, that served them well during the recovery. DuPont also has a very interesting story to tell about their investment in R&D during their early history in the 1930s and how that preserved their future, even though at the time that was a difficult decision to make. Third question comes from Rita Marcelli in Cairo. She asks a question. She says, how can we convince clients that now is the time to change their culture to what they want it to be? Most of them are using the economic situation to do very little because they say they don't want to, and they don't want to waste money. They don't have money to waste. It's a good question. It's a good question all over the world. In our experience, organizations and individuals only begin to change when the pain of staying the same gets to be too great. It hurts too bad to stay on the island. We have to start thinking about what we will do as we get off the island. You may have come across John Cotter's new book that he wrote with one of his consulting colleagues called Our Iceberg is Melting. It's built around John's classic work on leading change, but the story is about a bunch of penguins who discover that their iceberg is melting. They change because they don't have any choice to do it. In those cases, our tools, our solutions are used by companies to see more clearly what those changes are, what those priorities are, and to build consensus around the fact that we've got a problem and now is the time to solve it. They don't have money to waste, but they need to make some important choices. They need to make it quickly. They need to make the decisions being well informed of the impact these may have on the organization top to bottom around the world. And that's a case where understanding the culture, the alignment, the effectiveness of the organization can add a lot of value even when the resources are tight. The fourth question comes from Bo Seifert in Stockholm. Good morning or good afternoon, Bo. Glad that you could join us. And Bo asked a question about how you would interpret the profile that you get from a culture survey. And he says, assuming that you have a circle almost full of color in each quadrant, which one would you concentrate on in a time of crisis? It's a good question, Bo. The model describes the traits. The survey assesses how an individual organization stacks up against those traits and gives them a benchmarked analysis. I think to the point, during a time of crisis, where are we going? Has to be the first question. And I think that that's not interesting, but I think it's not so different than it is during more stable times. We just have less time to make up our minds, focus our energy in our organizations to do something about it. So I think in crisis, and when the organization still seems fairly strong and has a full color profile in almost every area, that setting the mission for the future, clearly understanding the trade-off between short-term and long-term goals is the place to start. You know, the trade-off between short-term and long-term goals is difficult all the time, not just when we're in financial crisis, but solving the short-term, meeting the short-term goals in a way that builds the long-term future is a dilemma that leaders always have to wrestle with. So I guess that would be my answer as to where would you start in a time of crisis. Organizations change successfully by starting the process with any of these four traits, but during a time of crisis, knowing where we're going is probably the most important of these. So we're about through with our time. So as I said, we will respond to each of your questions. But I think that we should stop now in terms of responding during the webcast. We're really delighted that you could join us today. We appreciate your questions, your feedback, your advice. And as I said at the beginning, we will be doing a monthly webcast on topics relevant to the times. And our next webinar will be hosted by Greg Bliss, who works with us closely in Chicago as one of our senior consultants, and that'll be on Wednesday, March 25th at 11 o'clock Eastern Time. And we'll send you update information on that, and you could also visit our website for more information. So all of our best to you. Travel safe, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.